So as we jump right in this morning to the series, I just want to ask you the question, what is the overall vibe in our world today? If you were to just, say, what is the feeling that we have in the world today? Maybe in our country? What is that vibe? I mean, listen, we're coming up on almost 2 years of a worldwide pandemic. It seems like there's a lot of despair, right? A lot of hopelessness. And it's not only a lot of despair because of the sickness and the death, but there's a lot of division over the pandemic as well. In fact, there's a lot of division over almost anything nowadays. Just bring anything up and there's someone that's going to argue against it. And there's just so much despair and so much division, so much strife and anger that just seems. And maybe besides all that, or maybe to some degree because of all that, there's just seems to be just higher levels of worry and anxiety, depression. What about a little bit closer to home? What about in your home, in your family? What about you personally? What is the overall vibe or the feeling that you have? I was looking through the church prayer list this past week, and there's just a lot of stuff happening in your lives. Maybe you lost a loved one this past year, and so this Christmas season, it's going to be really different for you. It's going to be difficult. Maybe you've lost a job, or maybe you're just not where you want to be in life. Life's stressful, maybe. Maybe you have division in your family. Maybe there's strained relationships at home. Division. Maybe there's just a feeling of despair. I'm not sure what's happening or what's going on in your lives, but you know. And so this Advent season, we're supposed to celebrate Jesus as the light of the world, the hope that we have through Jesus, the peace that we have, the love and the joy that we have through Jesus. Yet in our world and in our lives, oftentimes, there seems to be despair instead of hope, division instead of peace. There seems to be hatred and anger sometimes instead of love. There seems to be sorrow oftentimes instead of joy. That seems to be the reality. So what do? Do we just put on a happy face and kind of ignore all that stuff and light some candles and sing some songs, and then in 4 weeks when the Christmas season's over, we just go back to life as we know it? And maybe you're asking yourself, man, he's not very cheery. Why is he not very cheery? This is the Christmas season. Why is he starting this season on such a downer? Well, listen, here's where we're going. I've never really celebrated Advent much, like in regards to lighting candles and the Advent wreath. And I mean, I can remember as a kid lighting the candles, but since then I haven't really done much of that. And since I've been here at Living Grace, we haven't done that at all. But I thought we would this year. I thought we'd light the candles, and I thought that we would focus on the simple message of Jesus. It's a simple message, but it's such a profound message. Light these candles to represent Jesus, the light of the world, to represent Jesus entering into our despair, Jesus entering into the division, the anger, the hatred, the sorrow. And as we do that, I think we'll discover, and in fact, we're gonna discover how to experience, not just talk about it, but how to experience hope and peace and love and joy in our lives. The hope and the peace and the love and the joy that only comes through Jesus. And so each week during this Advent season, we're going to spend some time, and each week we're going to look back. We're going to look back in remembrance. Advent is from a Latin word meaning coming or arrival. And so Advent's been celebrated for a long time. Some think that it was celebrated as early as the 4th or 5th centuries. And so for centuries, Christians around the world have been celebrating this, have used the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas to prepare themselves to celebrate the arrival of Jesus in the manger, the first coming of Jesus, the birth of Jesus some 2,000 years ago. You know, and maybe you've used the Advent calendars. You use those Advent calendars where you count down the days. And of course, maybe some of you are familiar with the Advent wreaths and the candles. All these things help build the anticipation and the expectation. And so each week, that's what we're going to do. We're going to look back and we're going to remember. And we're going to remember and we're going to worship. We're going to worship God for who He is, for what He's done through Jesus. And here's what we're also going to do. We're going to look even further back at each week. We're going to go all the way back to the beginning, to the creation of the world. Because we have to go back to the beginning, to Genesis, to understand why we experience all the despair and the hopelessness in our world today. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go back and we're going to look into Genesis. And from Genesis, from the beginning, we kind of understand the predicament that we're in. But we also see from Genesis, from the beginning, a line traced all the way through the Scriptures, pointing to Jesus, leading to Jesus, where we see redemption, restoration, and new creation. And so in the past, in traditional Advent celebrations, they would oftentimes use the first 2 weeks of Advent to focus on the birth of Jesus, the first coming of Jesus. And then they would spend the next 2 weeks of Advent focusing on his second coming. And so we're going to do that each week as well. We're not only going to look back in remembrance, but we're going to look forward with anticipation. It's not too difficult, I think, to put ourselves in the shoes of the Israelite people back in that day. I mean, they lived in such a dark world. They experienced so much despair, hopelessness. And for the longest time, they waited. They longed for the Messiah. They looked forward with such anticipation and expectation for a new king to arrive on the scene, to make all things right for them. And that's what they were looking forward to. But for us, on this side of the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus, for us, He's already set that in motion. And so now we wait with expectation, with anticipation. We look to the future. You see, the Advent season isn't just a celebration of Jesus in the manger. It's a celebration, and it's a longing for restoration and new creation that will one day be fully and finally realized on earth as it is in heaven when Jesus returns as King. And so each week we will look back in remembrance, we'll look forward with anticipation, and then each week we're also gonna talk about what it means to live in the everyday reality of what Jesus has done for us and what He will do someday. How does all this impact the world we live in? How does it impact my world today, here and now? What does it mean to live an everyday Advent? So each week we'll discuss that. We're going to discuss how Jesus' first coming and His second coming should impact us every day. Those of us who follow Jesus, how should it impact us every day? We have lights, we have decorations, Santa Claus, presents under the tree. All these things just are so exciting and adds to the celebration. And I love this. I love this season. But as followers of Jesus, what is even more exciting is what God is accomplishing. What God is accomplishing in us and through us, here and now. And so we're going to look back in remembrance. We're going to look forward in anticipation. And we're going to learn to live in the everyday reality of what God is doing in us and through us to continually invade this dark world that we live in with peace, with hope, with love, with joy. Hope. What is hope? The dictionary definition of hope is this: a feeling of expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen. So it's like a feeling of optimism. You know, I want something to happen. I desire it for it to happen. So I hope that it will happen. I really want to pass that test. I really want that. I need that, and so I hope I will. Or maybe on a more serious note, I really want that loved one to be healed of that sickness. I really desire that. I hope it will happen. Or I sure want my family to be safe from this pandemic. I want that. I hope that will be so. You see, for us, hope is often based on circumstances. I hope things are going to get better. I hope things will start looking up. Let's cross our fingers and hope that it will. I hope things turn around soon, but it's not looking good. It doesn't look great, but you know, all we can do is hope. As a kid, I can remember my brother and I, we hoped for that Atari game system. You remember Atari? Some of you have no idea what I'm talking about, but it was the game system was Atari. You know, it had the one little joystick with just one red button. It was just a joystick with one red button. It was so cool. Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Frogger, all those incredible games. And we really longed, we hoped for that gift. But the circumstances in our mind were, you know, it was too expensive. There was no way we could afford an Atari. And so that Christmas, it was pretty exciting when we were surprised. We were shocked when we saw that Atari system under the tree. It was pretty incredible. But for us, when we think of hope for us is often optimism based on circumstances, the circumstances that we're living in, the circumstances surrounding us. But hope in the Scriptures is way different than that. The words that are used in the Hebrew language and in the New Testament and the Greek language for hope means so much different, so much more than an optimism based on circumstances. Hope in the Scriptures means to wait with confident trust. Wait with confident trust. Expecting it to happen, expectant hope. Trusting that it will happen. It's not based on a feeling or a desire. It's not based on any circumstances, but it's based on trust and confidence in God. And here are some examples we see this throughout the Scriptures, but here are a few examples. Psalm 33:20, we wait in hope for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. Psalm 135, I wait for the Lord. My whole being waits, and in His word I put my hope. Micah 7:7, but as for me, I watch and hope for the Lord. I wait for God, my Savior. My God will hear me. This is a biblical picture of hope. So let's look back now in remembrance. of why there's so much brokenness and despair and hopelessness in our world today. And we have to begin with Genesis, right? We have to go back to the beginning. And while we're looking back and in the very beginning, we're going to catch this glimpse of hope. And this is, for many of us, this is just a review because we went over the first 3 chapters in Genesis a few months ago. So this is kind of a review, but let's be reminded that, the creation was perfect. Perfect in every way. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine being a part of a perfect world, perfect creation? It functioned with perfection. Relationships were perfect. Everything was perfect. And then humanity, the first human beings, Adam and Eve, chose their way over God's way. They chose to reign themselves instead of looking to God to reign. And that never goes well. It didn't go well for them. It never goes well for us either. And because of that, sin entered the picture. Darkness, depravity, sickness, death. It messed up relationships. It messed up all of creation. But maybe you'll remember that right in the midst of all that pain and all that heartbreak and despair, we catch a glimpse of hope. Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, God is speaking to the serpent. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. You see, there's going to be an offspring that will come someday from the woman, from humanity. In the midst of all that despair, there is hope, because one day I'm going to send an offspring. I'm going to send a snake crusher. I'm going to send an evil crusher, someone that's going to take care of it once and for all. And I love how the Jesus Storybook Bible puts it for kids. This is kind of my level. Before they left the garden, God whispered a promise to Adam and Eve. It will not always be so. I will come to rescue you. And when I do, I'm going to do battle against the snake. I'll get rid of the sin and the dark and the sadness you let in here. I'm coming back for you. And he would. One day, God himself would come. I love that. It's pretty simple, and like I said, it's on my level. That speaks to the hope. And from that point on, the people of Israel longed for the time that God would send the snake crusher to set all things right, to crush evil altogether, make all things new the way that it was in Eden, the way it was in the very beginning, the way it was meant to be. And so this candle of hope is also known as the prophet's candle. Maybe you've heard that before. The prophet's candle. Because throughout the scriptures, and especially in the prophets, we see this message of hope and what was to come, and who was to come. And so, nearly 700 years before Jesus stepped on the scene, the prophet Isaiah wrote that this hope would arrive from the line of David. Isaiah 9:6. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. I'm sure we'll come back to this verse several times throughout this series. But he continues, of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. And then back in Genesis again, some 1,500 to 2,000 years before Jesus arrived on the scene, it was written that Jesus, this hope would come from the tribe of Judah. Genesis 49:10, the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. And the prophet Micah, around the same time as Isaiah, he spoke that this hope would come from the town of Bethlehem. Micah 5:2, but to you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come from me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from ancient times, actually from everlasting to everlasting. And in Isaiah, again, he speaks a lot about the coming hope. He speaks that this hope, and this is where it gets really strange, this hope would actually suffer and die. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Isaiah speaks that this hope would be a great light. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. And these are just a few of the hundreds of prophecies written hundreds of years before, some 1,000 or more years before it happened. And with the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus, we find that it happened exactly as they said it would. And Jesus, the snake crusher, he steps foot on the scene, and he puts in motion, he sets in motion this plan of restoration and redemption and new creation, a plan that would rid the world of sin and death once and for all, starting with the restored hearts of his people, restored hearts of you, the restored hearts of me, those of us who put our trust in him. And so by looking back in remembrance, we learned that hope for the world and hope for ourselves is not based on circumstances. It's not based on what's happening around us, but on God's promises. He has done what he said he would do. Our confidence, our hope is found as we look back in remembrance. But our hope is also found as we look forward with anticipation. Because, as I said earlier, Advent is about the first coming of Jesus and the second coming. It's about remembering his arrival as this baby in a manger, but it's a waiting with anticipation his coming someday as King of glory, to restore all things, to make all things new, to take care of this mess that we see around us. And so listen, if we truly believe that God has done what he said he would do, then there's also hope for the future, right? No matter how crazy our world gets, no matter how dark and messed up it seems, no matter what the circumstances that you find yourself in today. But based on trust and confidence in God. And here's his promise. In Revelation 21:4, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who was seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy. They're trustworthy and they're true. And so we wait. We wait with expectant hope. We look forward with anticipation to what we trust what we trust will be accomplished someday. And so I understand that there may be some of you who might be skeptical about this. I don't know. I mean, I don't even know who all is watching online, but there may be some skepticism about all this. What has happened, what will happen someday. But for those of us who believe, those of us who follow Jesus, by looking back, we believe that he has done what he said he will do, and by looking forward, we trust that he will accomplish it. That's what we trust in. That's what we believe in. And if that's really true, if we really, truly believe that, then shouldn't that have just profound implications on how we live today, here and now? Shouldn't that have just huge implications on our current reality? So I ask you this. Are you living with this everyday kind of hope? Are you living in the reality of hope in your life? Are you experiencing hope? Because if not, I think you need to ask yourself a couple questions. The first one is, do I really know Jesus? Am I really following Jesus? Do I have a relationship with Jesus? Because trust comes through intimacy. Trust comes through relationship. Knowing and following Jesus leads to a deeper trust. And a deeper trust leads to greater hope. So I ask you, are you following him? Do you know him? Do you have a relationship with him? And this Christmas season may be your opportunity to begin following Jesus. And I'd love to continue that conversation with you. After the service, you can send me a message if you're watching online. We can talk on the phone. We can chat. We can meet up for coffee. We can go out for lunch. I'd love to continue that conversation. But if you are following Jesus and you're still not really experiencing this hope, maybe you need to ask yourself this question: am I focusing on my circumstances too much? Am I focusing on what's going on around me? Because when you focus on your circumstances and you focus on everything that's going on around you, it's going to lead to hopelessness every time. But focusing on God and his word and his promises will lead more and more and more to a confident trust, a greater hope. And so why, for those of us who are following Jesus, why is living in the everyday reality of hope so important? Why does it matter? Because the world and the people around us and the people in our lives will catch a glimpse of hope through us. And I love the way New Testament scholar N.T. Wright puts it. He says, we are as a church, and then we are as individuals, to be advance signs of what God is going to do for the whole of creation. I love that. I want to read it again. We are as a church, and then we are as individuals to be advance signs of what God is going to do for the whole of creation. You see, what has happened and what is currently happening in our hearts is planned for all of creation someday. Do you believe that? Do you trust that? Do our coworkers hear us complaining all the time about what's happening in our world? Because that's not showing them what hope looks like. That's not giving them a picture of confident trust that God's got this. Do our friends, our neighbors, our family members just hear us complaining and freaking out all the time about what's going on, maybe in our country or our government or whatever? That's not giving them a picture. It's not giving them a picture of hope. It's not demonstrating confident trust that God's going to set all this right someday. We hope in that. We trust in that. yes, there's a lot of despair, sickness, death, division, anxiety, loss of hopes and dreams, loss of family members. But this Christmas season, we don't just celebrate everything that's good. And ignore everything else. We don't just ignore everything that's messed up in our world and messed up in ourselves. We face it on. We face it full on with hope, with confident trust, knowing that God is making all things new. He's bringing about new creation in us and through us. And they'll see that through us. They'll hear that, what they see us talking about. They'll see and they'll hear whether we truly believe that or not. In our attitudes, and what we say, and how we live. They'll see whether we're living in the everyday reality of hope or not, whether it's really made a difference in our lives. So we look back in remembrance of Jesus coming as a baby in the manger, en route to the cross. We look forward with anticipation to Jesus' return as King of Glory. And in the meantime, we learn to live in the everyday reality of what God is doing in us and through us, to invade our dark world with hope. I'm going to ask the worship team to come back up, and we're going to prepare to take communion together. And here's where I want to land this morning. In Paul's second letter to the church in Corinth, he said these words. It was read earlier, 2 Corinthians 4, 8, and 9. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. How could Paul say that? How could Paul and the early church members say that? We're experiencing so much right now. We are hard-pressed, but we're not crushed. We're not crushed. We are hopeful. I mean, just think about their world that they lived in. What they had to experience was so much worse than what we have to experience today. So much despair, so much darkness. So how was he able to say, I am not crushed? Well, remember Isaiah's words 700 years prior? He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Paul was able to say, I'm not crushed. I have hope because Jesus was crushed instead. And Jesus took all the sin and death and sickness and hopelessness and despair and all the evil and everything that is not right in our world upon himself. And he was crushed on the cross. But we know that wasn't the end, right? 3 days later, he did the crushing. Just like God said in the very beginning. He rose from the dead. He was the snake crusher when he crushed sin and death and disease and sickness and despair and evil, and he set in motion restoration and new creation that begins in our hearts and will one day be fully and finally realized. That's where our hope lies. And that's what we remember, and that's what we celebrate this morning.